The big question today is going to be who's going to actually show up this week.
Yeah, good question. I don't know. I'm unemployed, so this week is just like any other week for me. It's not like I'm taking time off of work or anything.
Myself, I went semi-retired um,
What's
end
that?
of I went semi-retired end of October, and so focusing on open source, which means all the time I want to do this stuff.
Oh, nice. Did you work at Docker before that or something?
I worked for a consulting company, did partner with Docker,
Okay, cool.
and then they got acquired by IBM.
Yeah. Well, you're living the dream. I I was laid off earlier this year and have been living off of severance, and now I'm just finally like lowering my job application standards to consider Golang jobs again after thinking I could be uh, really picky and find a Rust job. Hasn't
Mm-hmm.
materialized yet.
Yeah, they're a little hard to find. I'll be right
Okay.
back. Refill my drink first. I'm back, and still no one showed. No one else showed.
I don't know if I'll be a very engaging sole other attendee. I was planning on just being a fly on the wall.
Yeah, so far before this, I was just reading the Container D implementation. That
Or
was,
like the Auth implementation.
yeah, there's a PR sitting out there. So I was reading through that one for the working group. And we got Victor. Welcome, Victor.
Good afternoon or morning.
I just go with a happy Tuesday, and that covers every time zone unless they cross the date line.
So, Brandon, where are you based?
I'm based out of the Mid Atlantic, just outside of DC.
Oh, yeah, I'm in Florida,
A
Tampa,
couple
Florida.
East Coasters. Got the picture to match too.
Yeah. So I think I heard you're retired.
Semi-retired, focusing on open source.
Nice.
Realized I was spending all my time doing that at the job anyway, and at some point they were going to get another client for me to work on.
I think
How do
that
you
would
get
be
into?
my dream job too, to do semi-retired doing open source only.
It's
Yeah,
surprising how much my days feel like they were before I retired.
I was just going to ask, how do you get into consulting?
I had been in consulting from day one of me entering the job market. I
Oh,
was got out of college, walked in the door, and they said, "Congratulations, you're a consultant now." And which is a funny thing to tell to someone that's a college graduate because you're selling someone that's got experience with the problems you're facing. And I had none of that. But that's what companies did back then at the end of the dot-com boom before everybody realized that it had been a bust.
hmm.
But I had learned some software from IBM back in the day. They sent me off to some training for that. Went off, implemented that for a bunch of clients. And then IBM had deprecated that when I was a consultant for a company, went off to another company. They sent me off to a bunch of DoD sites and other things like that. And then after that part of my career, I said, well, it's time for me to shift into being independent. So went independent for several years, and then IBM deprecated the whole product line that I was consulting around. So back in the job market, learned the Docker stuff right when that was starting to take off. Startup as the first employee at another company in the DC area that was going to be a focus on that side of the DevOps space, be a Docker business partner, a bunch of those things. And then a few years later, we got acquired by IBM. That is a oversimplification of my entire career. But yeah, it's funny getting away from IBM and then getting acquired by IBM. I figured nothing else. We've got this one sitting out there. In fact, I'll share the original PR for Container D. Figured we can chat about this a little bit this week. And then if no one else shows, we can probably just wrap up early. Get people back a little bit of their time. How's that sound, folks?
Yep.
Sounds good.
Yeah, I spent a little time looking over this earlier. And from what I'm seeing here, it looks pretty similar. I was going to ask Nathan or anybody else that jumped in to talk about this. A lot of the focus was, hey, they're not doing any merging, and their definition of merging is that they've got a pull action and then a pull push action shows up, and they don't merge those two together. I'm curious if they have anything internal to generate some of these that says, hey, I'm getting ready to do a push to this repo. Let me generate one of these in my list of scopes just in case the registry doesn't do it or not. But they're not here to answer that question. That'll be one of my outstanding questions on this. Otherwise, they've got some similar retry logic. They've got some sample, multiple scopes are included in there. When they see the 401, they just retry after they set up the authentication headers in the request. It was funny they retry on method not allowed, but I wonder there's some stuff down below that describes what they're doing for that. And then timeouts and too many requests are normal retry things for people. The logic itself builds the URL. If they've got any details for credentials, they add the credentials into there. They build the requests, send it off. If they get a 401 back, they're in the retry loop on that point. And they retry with the details they have from that 401. And they cap it at 5 times. Basic authentication is the same as I think everybody is doing. The bear authentication, as I was skimming through, it looked very similar to everything else. And I think a lot of us have all been copying each other's code on this one a whole bunch of times. I think we all went back to the distribution project out there, distribution, or CNCF project on that one. But the method not allowed, this was where they were really doing that fallback, where they would do a get request, or sorry, they were doing a post request, and if the post said method not allowed, they would fall back to a get. And we've got 2 methods allowed for authentication, so that just made a lot of sense. I'm not sure how much a retrial method not allowed applies to other requests unless they have alternative methods they can use. Otherwise, in here, if they're doing a get, they pass the realm, they check for the 200 code. In there, they're setting the service, the scopes, there's a bunch of parameters in there. On the get, these are all query parameters on the request. And then if they've got a credential, they pass the basic authentication header to the token server to get the token out of it. And that's the way everybody does it. And then, yeah, they've got the decoding of the token to pull out the token itself, or the token response, where they're pulling out the token in there, checking refresh times, setting access token to the value of token, different things like that. A couple of us all copy the same code to implement that one. And then on the post request, very similar. They're saying a bunch of these things as form fields instead of parameters on the get request. And if they have a user, they can specify the grant type of password, or that they've got a refresh token, they can pass that through. Otherwise, they're just going to ask with no user to say, hey, give me an anonymous request, this one, and see if that goes through or not. But the key difference is they're passing in the form fields themselves, the user and password, instead of passing as the header. I'm trying to remember. I feel like I'll do both. I might pass it in the form field itself. I'm trying to remember if I also pass it as the basic header when I do the post request. Easy enough for me to look that up. I've got the whole implementation I wrote down. Pardon me while I'm on another screen here to see. And with the post, say user and password. And no, I don't actually do anything else in there. That's the same way I do it. So again, we're all copying the same code. And then, yeah, the same decode goes through where they're looking for all the responses there for the post as they do for the get. And then a few references. So pretty quick and simple. I think the fact that we've done 3 of these already made it fairly straightforward, kind of copying and pasting from everywhere else. How does that sound to folks here? We may end up having to go back through this one again after Thanksgiving and people are back and showing up at the meeting again.
At least from me, no comment. Sorry, don't have the expertise to comment.
Yeah. Wayne, I think you already mentioned you want to be a fly on the wall.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yes.
I some actually other question, maybe not even related
Yeah,
to
go ahead.
this working group. I know you want to turn off recording or not, but the question I have is for standard. This is more about the client side authentication on the container D side. About the identity provider. Now there are all kinds of identity providers for human to human, human to machine, machine to machine, human. So, is there any standard you think you like for as a identity provider protocol? I would say not specifically to a provider, but the protocol. For
Yeah, I think
example, OpenID Connect seems to be very popular for human to machine authentication. How about
yeah,
like
no,
machine to machine?
I think a lot of the code we've been copying back and forth from each other, that we are going through the different gets and puts and the tokens and whatnot. I think a lot of that does go back to OIDC and a little bit of OAuth too. So there's going to be commonality in there. And that's where I think we need to look in this working group at those kind of protocols and see what things we can use from there that are standard and where we're going to have to specify to do something a little different outside of what the other things do. I feel like there were some, I could probably give you better examples of what we can't do if I was looking at the spec again. I remember hitting a few of those last time I started looking at it.
How about machine to machine authentication? You feel that's still OpenID or is something else? Because it looks like, for example, OpenID by default doesn't store the. Actually, I will say this. So that I have some articles that's talking about just the difference between specifically about machine-to-machine authentication. Uh, yeah, maybe too much here. Might ping you offline about those?
Yeah, I mean, I'm also happy to chat here about it if we're talking authentication. I'm always happy
Let
to
me
talk about
let
it.
me find those and post here then.
Yeah, and if it's something you want to get a bigger audience on that isn't here today, we can also take it into the working group Slack.
I've been participating in the CNCF, the zero trust security discussions. So definitely seems to be the number one important is to really identity. IDM is actually very important there, right? So how do you trust that identity, and in what situation? I do not know, is there a clear definition for that? I know for OpenID Foundation has a lot of initiative. For example, it's called a verifiable credentials. Basically, how do you verify you are you, right? For banking, so there are a lot of work done for the human side to verify who you are. But for device identity, I don't think there is a similar effort.
It even gets more complicated than that, because when you think about what happens for this authentication that we just described, it goes through a very specific, you have a password, a user to log into the service, and you get back a token and you use that token. Or basic authentication is just a user password everywhere. There's no option for two-factor. There's no option for any of these other out-of-band identity things for individual humans to respond with. So some of this may be seen a little bit as verifying machines, and that makes a little bit of sense when you consider that a lot of this is coming from things like a Kubernetes cluster or something like that. We don't have defined in here things like MTLS or any other, I've done a lot with the Spiffy Spiral where you're getting credentials all the way down to individual components, processes running in things. None of that we've defined here, at least not in the
I'll
past.
post some links. For example, there is a NIST. Is that NIST, or actually that's trust computing documentation about device identity? Basically, a bunch of attestations to make sure the device identity is who it is. Then also there's the HashiCorp. It's more high level. In order to do security zero trust, you have to have a machine to machine and human to machine, those kind of thing. So, but there's, I said, there seems to be that discussion in the trust computing doesn't seem to be as active as OpenID when it comes to human to machine identity.
Yeah, and as I'm thinking through the challenges we'll run into, I wonder how much of this, if any, we could retrofit on top of what's already there today with registries. Just knowing that.
In other words, if I'm OCI, I can say I can trust OpenID because that's a protocol that's actually being worked on. But how do I trust the device identity? There's not seems to be a active working group on that for the latest update on that. Device identity.
I think the closest you would get out of the box today would be MTLS, where you would have both the server side and the client side certificates verifying each other.
I mean that the MTRS IETF working group.
MTLS is just it's mutual TLS is what it stands for. And so the same TLS encryption you would see going for HTTPS or any of the other protocols that use it, the mutual TLS just says that not only is the client verifying that the server is really google.com, but Google is verifying your client certificate is coming from a client that it wants to talk to. And so it's a way of getting a little bit stronger credential in there of you verifying. I don't know how many people are doing that these days, just because registries often don't care who their clients are. Often, not always, but often.
Yeah, there is active. Of course, IETF have everything, but MTRS seems to be one of the active thread as well. Yeah, so, but there does not seems to be as active discussion when it comes to device identity and verification.
Yeah, a lot of this I think back to things I've done with the Spiffy Spire project, which gets into not just the individual device, but the process on the device that's running. And so getting into some of those zero trust kind of implementations where you delegate out the credentials to everybody. I'm not sure how easy it would be to leverage any of those workflows on top of container registries. And it's not just having a registry support, you also need the container runtime support as well.
Going back to this world, the container world, when it comes to identity, what's your thought about what protocol to trust to use in general, not specifically OCI, I guess.
Yeah, when I think to what we've been doing in this working group, I think the initial focus is going to be what Docker standardized a while back. So it's just going to be a simple user password, and the password can be a token. So you'll get a personal access token from some, wherever GitHub Action or GitHub Container Registry or Docker Hub or whatever registry you're talking to. There are a few different ways you can get shorter-lived tokens from those tools. One of them that we explicitly said, okay, this, getting those credentials in there was out of scope for this group, but the credential helpers that you see in Docker and a couple of other projects out there is probably the closest you would get to what would work as just a plug and play model with what's going on in OCI. Those are just a way, though, to get a user password that you can log in with, but it just lasts for a shorter lifetime. It's considered more of an ephemeral login than something long-lived. And because it's more ephemeral, that means that you're trusting that one instance and not something that can get leaked out and reused later on. It probably doesn't answer your question, but I'm pulling it back to the OCI itself.
I infer the answer is OpenID for the lower level protocol, specifier for the actual workload. That's the answer, right?
Yeah, I think I need to look to see if it's OIDC or if it's the OAuth 2. What specifically we picked and worked with when we started standardizing all this in OCI. So that's going to be between the two ends, between the client and the server over the wire effectively. There is the part from the client side of saying, how does the client get the user password combination to plug into that? And I think that's a little bit of where you're going, is if you're trying to verify an individual device, that user password is going to be not just the standard username long-lived password that something would log into as a normal human. It's going to be something more as a one-time token or something like that.
Yeah, mainly the reason I'm bringing it up is just thinking of the zero trust principle, right? So everything can be compromised. So how do you test everything, including the device and human?
From the signing world, the take that I look at from this one is I don't trust it. A lot of the solutions when they look at container image signing and trying to put security on top of this is they assume malicious registry. And if you assume malicious registry, it doesn't matter. The registry verify that they talked to a really trusted person to upload the image. The consumer downstream from that doesn't know that you're trustworthy. And so they try to take that whole part of the pipeline out of the picture. They sign the initial image before it ever gets uploaded or immediately after it got uploaded if they know the digest only after it gets uploaded. But that digest is content addressable. It can't be, it's immutable from the definition of what that means. And so the signature on top of that gives you that out of band verification. It's alongside the image, but it verifies that nothing in that whole upload the image to the registry, download from the registry to your client, nothing could have changed it because you had that immutable digest, and that immutable digest was signed by something outside the registry entirely.
Yeah, maybe another general question. So, there are a lot of things people say that zero trust itself is not enough, but it does sort of cover everything, right? Basically, saying everything cannot be trusted. You have to do a lot of things for trust test, verify everything, every person, every device. So, if it's not enough, what are the complementary principles or frameworks that for zero trust?
Yeah. If you take this back to the signing, the way that they get the sign keys is probably more what you're looking at. And so once you're implementing image signing, you've got the sign key, you've got notation, you've got cosign. The cosigner of the SakeStore project does keyless signing, where they base it off of a short-lived OIDC token from a trusted provider. If you're doing your build in a CI pipeline, each individual run of the pipeline has its own token value that it's working from. So that's typically the way they're working it, is they're verifying that you were this identity in a CI pipeline that ran this build, and they're using that to generate a short-lived credential based off of that, or short-lived sign key.
Yeah, this is a very kind of open-ended question. So, some people say this like the complementary is how to say what is called holistic approach, security approach is the complementary principle. That's always also quite vague on what it means.
I think given how much images are copied around, people get sensitive to trying to put all the trust in the registry, because you may have a really hardened registry you upload to, and then your end users might copy it to some on-prem registry they're working from, and you have no control over how secure that registry is as the producer, and half the time it's even as the client. So putting too much trust in the registry server itself feels very problematic, just because the people that have to put all that trust into it, how do they really know that anybody did the right thing there, especially when this content's getting copied around?
So it's hard to really solve the security problem.
Well, if you pull it out of the registry and you move it to the sign layer, you can at least guarantee that if you see that image with that digest, that the person that signed it isn't the registry. It may not even be the person that uploaded it to the registry, but it is a verified identity that you can go back to and look at that sign key and say, okay, that person with that sign key verified this specific digest. That specific digest guarantees that image never changed when it came to you.
There's just no easy way to attach like a biometrics to a person to attach something to the software artifacts.
To the software artifact, maybe not. To the sign key, maybe. I don't know how that would exactly look. There are people that have sign keys stored off in some HSM, two-factor auth, all the different requirements like that, and that's how you do their signing. So much these days when you're doing container images, though, the signing is run by an automated system. It's a CI pipeline.
Right. Cool. Thank you. Thank you, Brandon.
Yeah. So a lot of this, I think, is going to be before it ever hits the stuff that we're trying to standardize in this working group. And then this working group is just going to say, yeah, you've got this credential, are you allowed to log into the registry? And I think what we're going to come down to is that credential needs to get boiled down to some kind of user password combination, but that password could be a very short-lived token that proves that you've gone through some other out-of-band stuff before you start talking to authentication server, which that's what you see with the credential helpers. They're like logging into a cloud registry out there today. If you do a login to ECR, ACR, a bunch of these other registries, they've got credential helpers that verify you on your machine have access to their cloud service, and they give you a short-lived token to do that. Anything else we want to chat about today? Victor, you were saying you were in Florida, or was that Wayne? I'm mixing it up.
I'm in Tampa, Florida.
Yeah. Okay. So Wayne, are you US based as well?
Yeah, I'm in Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Okay. Well, given all of that, I hope both of you have a very nice Thanksgiving holiday, and we'll pick this back up again next week. see if we get a few more people to show up.
You too.
And in
Happy
the
Thanksgiving.
meantime, what's that?
Happy Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
Yeah, happy thanks.
And yeah, in the meantime, I'll throw a couple of these links that you're putting out there, Victor, in our main notes and in the chat and see if anybody wants to talk about those offline as well. Take care, everybody.
Great, bye.